Hello class, welcome to week 6, where we discuss routing in chapter 7 of the TestOut modules. So I've done something a little different. This time I've condensed some of the content into usable portions rather than repeating some of the sections that they go over in TestOut. I've just pulled all of the noteworthy things and we'll briefly go through all of that. So routing, routers, and what are they? So routers are pretty fascinating pieces of equipment, and they handle routing as well as managing the routing tables, the ARP tables. They also discover other devices on the network as well as the best pathways for packets. They figure out how to route those packets. Some of the routers even have little firewalls. They're actually fairly sophisticated pieces of equipment. So routers route traffic based on the IP addresses, VLANs, and even MAC addresses. Routers build routing tables and they learn the topology of the network by various protocols in order to know how to route the traffic, as we just discussed. Some of those protocols use something called link cost, which is usually how many hops a packet can take before it reaches its destination. And it figures out the best path for the packets based upon that hop count. And also, it also uses a distance vector, speed, various methodologies for measuring the distance and the best path for packets. And so hop count, again, just how many, pretty basic, how many devices it takes before it gets to its destination. And if a router sees, two sections of the network, and the left-hand section takes two hops, and the right-hand section takes 5 hops, it's going to send the packets through the 2 hops. And as they covered, that doesn't always mean it's the fastest, though. So it will also, the routers can also measure speeds and develop their routing vectors based upon that. So if it's still faster to go through the 5 hops, it will route packets through that way. Again, also the distance vector, how far something is versus how close something is. And then there's the auto discovery and auto updating, such as the ND protocol or neighbor discovery protocol that we'll see here in a little bit, where routers will send out basically hello packets to see who's out there. And they'll ask for reporting update information from various routers. Some routers volunteer that information and say, hey, this is what's going on. They either broadcast what they know, or they respond to hello packets, etc. Some of the routing protocols are the RIP, the IGRP, the EIGRP. RIP uses the IGP or Interior Gateway Protocol for routing traffic. But the RIP is it's an old protocol. Again, that uses like the hello packets that discover the network, but it's only good for like 15 hops, so it can only find 15 devices out there around it per route, versus, let's say, IGRP, which can discover 100 devices, 100 hops, and EIGRP, which is the Enhanced Interior Gateway Routing Protocol, can go up to 255. So the OSPF is one of those fascinating protocols that, again, discovers other devices, other routers out there on the network, discovers the best pathways. It is an internal routing protocol. It uses the link cost, the shortest path. And so with OSPF, it gets updates from other routers. So router 1 can get updates from all the other routers that are sending out that information saying, hey, it's going to take so long to get to this destination. It's going to take so long to get to this destination. It's kind of like when you're traveling down the freeway and you see the LED billboards that say, it's going to be 15 minutes to this destination. It's going to be 2 hours for this destination. Same type of thing. Then we have the EGP, the Exterior Gateway Protocol, and you can read about a lot of these online. I'm just going to briefly go through some of them. The BGP, the ISIS or ISIS, um, different protocols for discovering devices on an internal network and an external network. So real quick before we get into redundancy, why all of these discovery protocols? Why aren't there just one? Well, a lot of times you have to know about some of the older protocols because they're still in use. Also because those are different protocols. There's internal and there's an external for discovering devices out there on the network and on the internet. And the internal protocols not only discover what's inside a local a LAN, but also if it's connected to a WAN, it can discover and be set up to route traffic differently. So one basic example is, let's say you have campus A and campus B, and they have a redundant connection. We'll get into that in a second. Redundant connection that uses, let's say, radio signal, Wi-Fi, to radio waves to get from one point from campus A to campus B, but it also uses digital to get from campus A to campus B. If, let's say, the digital line gets damaged or cut, it will automatically switch over to the radio signal. It may not be as fast, but it's a backup link, or it'll be a T1 line or something like that. That allows it's a lower cost, sometimes slower connection, but it's a backup. So the router will know that, okay, the line has been cut along here because I've lost contact with devices past this point, and so it knows that packets can only get to a certain point, so that line has been cut, and so it will route traffic around to the other direction. So redundancy, it is preferable to have redundancy. As we just talked about, a good example is campus A and campus B. There's a redundant internet connection, WAN connection, that if one goes down, the other takes over. And you can have that redundant connection within your edge network, such as your edge switches. They are all connected to each other in a mesh format. You can have that in your Wi-Fi, so that way, there's a mesh. So if one device goes down or one connection goes down for some reason, it doesn't disrupt a huge section of the network. So you have the FHRP, the first hop redundancy protocol. So it's redundant routers on the same address, and they're just mirrored. And again, they share a virtual IP and a MAC address, and kind of like the campus A, campus B scenario where it has a redundant WAN connection. You might have, let's say, two routers that are set up to handle those different types of traffic. They both have the same IP address and same MAC address, but one is basically turned off until the other goes down, and then, device B kicks on. So you have the Gateway Load Balancing Protocol, or GLBP, which balances the load between the gateways, and each router has its own virtual MAC address. And then, of course, one router is designated as the active virtual gateway, so both routers remain active and they process traffic as needed. NATting, so your network address translation, your NAT, is a forward-facing IP address, and a real simple example of this is your home network. So you get your internet connection from your internet service provider. It goes into, let's say, a modem, and then that modem goes into a router or whatever device that you have plugged into it in order to provide network and internet access to more than one device in your house. But that modem has a public IP address, and we talked about that in one of the other chapters. It has a public-facing IP address, so it's accessible to your internet service provider's servers. But everything behind that modem or router is hidden. It's been NATted. That means that, again, there's one public-facing IP address, and all of the IP addresses behind that device are private. So NAT is like a receptionist in a complex of suites. So if you were to arrive at a building, so if let's say you were sent to a doctor's office, and that doctor was in a building of suites. You type in your GPS, you're just given the, let's say, 2000 Wellness Drive, and you get to 2000 Wellness Drive, and it's listed as suite 235. When you type that in on your GPS, it's just going to take you to the outside of the building. It's not going to take you to the suite 235. And so in order to get to suite 235, you have to walk into the lobby, go up to the receptionist or to the map and say, where is suite 235? And that's where you get sent to from that point. So NATting is the same way. The GPS takes the packets to the modem, to the main building, and then it's up to the router at that point, the firewall, etc., to actually translate that information and say, okay, you're looking for suite 235, it's over here, or in this case it would be, IP address 10.2.20.15, and that's, this computer over here was requesting this information. As we've talked before, private IP addresses are not routable outside of the internal network. Just like if you were to send in that suite of that complex of suites, if one doctor's office were to send a packet of information, patient information to another doctor, let's say there's another specialist in the building and they share information back and forth between the normal mail couriers within that building, that package of information is only routable inside that building because usually it's stuck inside a standard, let's say giant manila envelope, and it's written on there, for Dr. So-and-so to review, and that's sent to that particular doctor in the building. That's not going to work if that envelope leaves the complex. At least one public IP address is needed to face the internet. Then you have your port address translation. That's how addresses are translated to the outer world and back again. It's kind of like that receptionist idea, or you go up to the map and you say, okay, where's suite 235? And that would be your port address translation saying, okay, where exactly does this go? Where exactly do I go? And it's saying, okay, well, you're going to go up on the second floor and it's going to be the third door to the right. And so that would be the same thing as port translation. Sometimes you have a many to one NAT. That's many internal IP addresses to one external IP address. That's fairly common, but for businesses, sometimes you have a one-to-one type of relationship, such as a static NAT, so it's a one-to-one mapping, where you have multiple forward-facing devices that need multiple public-facing IP addresses. So let's say web servers, services that need to be accessed from outside the network. And as a side note, usually businesses, organizations, etc., will have a static public-facing IP address, whereas homeowners will have a dynamically generated IP address. So if you were to check your IP address of your modem once a week at least, you would see that it's a different IP address each week. Sometimes possibly each day, depending on your internet service provider. And so that's going to change constantly. It prevents you, and really anybody else, from accessing your device, your modem, from outside the world unless you know that IP address. Whereas a business, let's say such as Google, etc., will have static IP addresses. They will always be that way. They will always be the same. Side note, you will still need security to protect the internal network, even though this has been NATted, even though there's a forward-facing device that is the front, so to speak, of the internal network, and the internal network is hidden, quote unquote. That doesn't mean that the internal network is impervious to hacking. Quite the contrary. You still need security devices. All right, and that's it for routing. Next week we will talk about firewalls, which are those security devices that prevent and filter traffic, both inbound and outbound. So we'll discuss that next week.